At first glance, the photograph looks peaceful. A young girl seated upright in a wicker chair, her hands gently folded around a single white rose. Her hair has been brushed and pinned with care, her small boots polished, her lace dress starched and pressed. Behind her stand her parents, both dressed in black, their faces calm but strained, as though they've practiced stillness for the camera. It is an ordinary Edwardian family portrait, taken in Rochester, New York, in the spring of 1909. But something about it feels wrong. The girl's face is pale, not the soft pallor of childhood, but a waxen stillness that no living child possesses. Her lips are slightly parted, and her eyes, though open, do not see. They stare just past the photographer's shoulder, glassy and unfocused, as though fixed on something no one else can perceive. The girl was named Clara Hastings, the only child of Dr. Edwin Hastings, a respected physician known across Monroe County for his modern approach to medicine, and his wife, Margaret, a gentlewoman from a well-to-do family. They lived in a grand but quiet house on East Avenue, near the University Hospital where Dr. Hastings practiced. By all accounts, the family was close. Edwin adored his daughter. Neighbors recalled the sight of him walking her to the park every Sunday, her small hand tucked into his coat pocket as she matched his steps. Margaret, frail and delicate since childbirth, often described Clara as her reason to keep breathing. There was no hint of scandal or sadness until March of 1909, when Clara fell suddenly ill. The illness began, so the records say, with a faint dizziness. She complained of seeing stars before her eyes and feeling cold, even when sitting by the fire. Within hours, she developed what her father diagnosed as scarlet fever. Yet the symptoms were strange. Her skin showed no rash, her pulse remained steady, and her breathing, though shallow, was rhythmic and calm. The household nurse, a woman named Mrs. Callahan, later told reporters she never once saw the child sweat, even at the height of her supposed fever. Still, Dr. Hastings declared the illness severe and confined her to her room, refusing outside consultation. On the night of March 14th, the maid heard a crash upstairs. When she entered the girl's room, she found Dr. Hastings standing by the bed, a syringe in his hand. He dismissed her quickly, saying his daughter's suffering had ended. Clara, he said, was gone. By morning, the house was sealed to visitors. The family physician, who might have verified the death, was never called. Instead, Dr. Hastings himself signed the certificate of death from acute fever, a diagnosis that would raise eyebrows among colleagues for decades. The undertaker arrived but was sent away after a brief exchange at the door. The reason, he later told a reporter, was that Mrs. Hastings had refused embalming. She said her daughter was only sleeping, he recalled. That evening, the photographer Samuel Kent was summoned to the Hastings home. Kent specialized in memorial portraits, common at the time for families wishing to preserve one final image of their departed loved ones. He later described arriving just before sunset. The parlor curtains had been drawn, candles arranged around the wicker chair where the girl sat. Her father, calm and methodical, adjusted the position of her hands. Her mother wept quietly in the corner, clutching a folded blanket. Kent, accustomed to the solemnity of such sittings, began to prepare his camera. He recalled that Dr. Hastings gave precise instructions. "Make it appear as though she rests," he said. "We wish her remembered as she was, peaceful." Kent nodded and positioned the tripod. The light was poor, and he asked to open a curtain. Hastings refused. "The daylight disturbs her," he said flatly. The photograph was taken with a long exposure, nearly 8 seconds. Kent noted that, for the briefest moment, the girl's fingers seemed to tremble against the stem of the rose. He dismissed it as the flicker of a candle or the effect of shadow. But later, when he developed the plate, he noticed something else, the faintest blur around the chest, as if it had risen ever so slightly, mid-exposure. For years afterward, Kent spoke little of that day. But in 1936, near the end of his life, he gave a short interview to a local historian collecting accounts of early post-mortem photography. What he said then was startling. "I have photographed the dead," Kent admitted. "But that girl, she was not like the others. She had warmth still. I remember her lips. They were soft, not set. And when I took the picture, I thought I saw her draw a shallow breath." If his recollection was accurate, it meant the unthinkable, that Clara Hastings may have still been alive when the shutter clicked. The photograph remained in the family's possession for decades, locked away in a cedar chest. The Hastings never spoke publicly of the event. Dr. Hastings continued his medical work, publishing several papers on experimental suspended animation techniques, claiming it was possible to slow the human pulse nearly to stillness through controlled chemical anesthesia and low-temperature therapy. Critics accused him of playing God. He ignored them. His wife, increasingly frail, was rarely seen outside their home again. When she died in 1917, her obituary mentioned only a lingering illness brought on by heartbreak. What truly happened in that Rochester home was left to rumor and speculation. But the photograph, now archived by the Monroe Historical Society, still exists. In the soft sepia tones, the composition seems almost tender. The father's hand on the chair, the mother's gaze downward, the candlelight glinting off the child's hair. Yet no matter how long one looks, the eyes of the girl draw you in. They are open, bright, and hollow. They give nothing back. Some say, the longer you stare, the more you sense that she is about to move. In every detail, it is a portrait of devotion and of denial. The image captures not only a moment of loss, but perhaps the instant just before it. And if the photographer's words were true, then the stillness of that frame was not peace at all, but the last fragile breath of life itself. To understand the photograph, one must understand the man who ordered it. Dr. Edwin Hastings was not an ordinary provincial doctor. Born in 1869 to a family of Methodist preachers, he graduated from the University of Pennsylvania's School of Medicine with honors before returning to New York to open a small private practice. By the early 1900s, he had gained a quiet but formidable reputation for his experiments with anesthesia and what he called reversible coma. In a series of private lectures delivered to his colleagues at Rochester General Hospital, Hastings argued that the boundary between life and death was far thinner than commonly believed. He described cases of patients who appeared deceased, no pulse, no breath, yet recovered under careful resuscitation. To some, his ideas bordered on genius. To others, they flirted with heresy. Behind closed doors, Hastings' obsession grew. Letters found decades later among the Medical Society's archives reveal his correspondence with European physicians experimenting with cryotherapy and induced hypothermia. He often referenced a belief that the human spark may be shielded, if only for a little while, until medicine advances enough to reignite it. It was this belief, friends would later say, that consumed him after his daughter's illness. The Hastings household in 1909 was both refined and uneasy. Margaret Hastings, delicate, devout, and privately melancholic, lived much of her life under her husband's shadow. While Edwin was known for his rational mind, Margaret held to spiritualism, the fashionable belief that the dead could be reached through seances and dreams. The two worldviews, science and faith, coexisted uneasily in the same home. Yet in Clara, their only child, those differences found harmony. She inherited her father's curiosity and her mother's compassion. To her teachers, she was a bright, obedient girl with a peculiar fascination for her father's instruments. Then came the spring fever. The original medical notes, long thought lost, were rediscovered in the 1940s among Dr. Hastings's old journals. The entries are terse, clinical, and haunting. March 12, 1909. Pulse low but steady. Patient complains of cold extremities, no sweating. Administered small-dose chloroform vapor to ease anxiety. March 13th, patient slipped into unconsciousness at 10:15 p.m., breathing shallow but rhythmic, unclear if true syncope or suspended state. Attempted to warm body, response uncertain. March 14th, cessation of pulse at 2:40 a.m., temporary. Must observe further before embalming. That last note, temporary, suggests he did not yet believe she was dead. But the following day the death certificate was filed. Why? Some historians suspect professional pressure. Others believe Margaret's grief forced his hand. The undertaker, Thomas Beale, testified years later to the county coroner that Dr. Hastings dismissed his offer of immediate embalming. He said there'd be no need, Beale recalled. He said she was resting and that the body must remain warm. The doctor reportedly placed heated bricks under the bed and ordered the windows sealed. To Beale it seemed madness. To Hastings it was science. During the following 2 days, strange noises were heard from the upper floor, hissing, faint tapping, the clink of metal. The servants were forbidden to enter. On the evening of the 16th, Dr. Hastings called in Samuel Kent, the photographer, insisting the girl be captured at her most natural state. When Kent arrived, the air was heavy with the smell of ether. The doctor explained that the fumes were to slow corruption. Kent's photograph, now digitized by the Monroe Historical Society, remains one of the clearest surviving images of a post-mortem child portrait. But several scholars have noted anomalies. A faint mist near the mouth, a slight motion blur along the lower eyelids, the presence of condensation on the lens despite the cool room temperature. These clues, while inconclusive, lend weight to Kent's later testimony that Clara was not entirely gone. After the photograph was taken, Hastings reportedly sealed his daughter's body in a lead-lined casket of his own design, equipped with a rudimentary glass viewing panel at the head. He claimed it was for preservation. But the design closely matched diagrams of experimental oxygen coffins appearing in European medical journals at the time, devices meant to delay decomposition and test resuscitation techniques. The coffin was interred not in the family plot at Mount Hope Cemetery, but privately in the garden behind the Hastings home. There was no minister, no record of burial, and no witnesses apart from the doctor and one assistant. Rumors circulated almost immediately. The house staff spoke of late-night digging, of flickering lights in the garden shed, and of the doctor emerging pale and trembling at dawn. Some claimed to have heard a woman's sobs followed by his voice, whispering, "Not yet, not yet." But in the absence of evidence, gossip faded with time. After 1910, Dr. Hastings's medical career faltered. He resigned his hospital post citing nervous exhaustion. His lectures ceased. In 1911, he published one final paper on transitory suspension of vitality in mammalian subjects, which drew harsh condemnation from peers. Unethical, they called it. A man playing with souls. Hastings withdrew entirely from public life. His wife's health deteriorated swiftly. Letters to her sister suggest she blamed herself for Clara's death, writing, "He told me she would wake again. He made me believe it. I waited, but she never opened her eyes." When Margaret died 8 years later, her husband did not attend the funeral. He left Rochester soon after and was never seen publicly again. Some claimed he moved west to Illinois under a different name. Others whispered that he had been committed to a private sanatorium. No official record confirms either story. For 2 decades, the Hastings house stood empty. Local children dared each other to peek through the dusty windows, claiming to see the faint shape of a girl at the window seat. By the 1930s, the building was condemned and demolished. The photograph and a few personal effects were passed to a distant cousin, who eventually donated them to the Historical Society without explanation. That might have been the end of it, until Dr. Howard Leland, a medical historian at the University of Toronto, stumbled across a reference to Hastings in an old issue of The Lancet. Intrigued, he began compiling records of early 20th century physicians who blurred the line between life and death. In 1936, Leland traveled to Rochester to investigate the rumor of the breathing photograph. He tracked down surviving witnesses, including the now elderly Samuel Kent. Leland's interview notes, later published in a 1954 medical ethics journal, record Kent's trembling recollection. Her eyes, they glistened when the flash went off. I saw moisture. You can't have that in the dead. When pressed, Kent insisted he had seen a faint tremor of the lips. A reflex, perhaps, Leland suggested. A trick of light. Kent shook his head. I know what I saw. It was not trick nor light. The girl moved. Further evidence emerged when Leland located the undertaker's son, now in his 70s. The man produced a bundle of letters written by his father, one addressed to the Rochester Board of Health, but never sent. In it, Beale warned of irregularities in the Hastings case and alleged that Dr. Hastings had refused to surrender the body for burial, keeping it for private research. The letter, unsigned and unsent, ended with the line, I fear the child was alive longer than anyone will ever admit. The deeper Leland dug, the darker the picture became. Among the Medical Society's archives, he found one final note by Dr. Hastings himself, written in an unsteady hand, perhaps in the years after his wife's death. The subject maintained warmth for 40 hours, pupillary response faint but present. External signs of vitality ceased following final injection. I failed her. God forgive me. To Leland, the meaning was unmistakable. Hastings had not merely documented his daughter's death, he had engineered it. Whether out of hubris or desperation, he had induced a state of suspended animation, believing he could restore her. The attempt failed, and in his grief he transformed the moment into a ritual of denial, the photograph serving both as evidence and absolution. When Leland tried to locate the grave, he found no record at Mount Hope or any local cemetery. The house grounds, now owned by the city, yielded nothing visible, yet neighbors recalled seeing city workers removing a small lead coffin during drainage repairs in 1922. Its contents were never recorded. The city foreman at the time later told reporters that the coffin was empty when opened. Whether that statement was literal or meant to spare the family name, no one could tell. By the time Leland completed his research, the story of the Hastings photograph had become a whispered cautionary tale in medical ethics circles. It raised questions that linger still. When does scientific curiosity cross into sacrilege? And how far will love go before it becomes destruction? For all the careful documentation, one piece remained missing, the photograph's glass negative. Leland searched fruitlessly until near the end of his life, it surfaced in a private collection. The negative bore faint scratches, likely from age, but also one curious detail unseen in the printed copy, a small, blurred figure standing just behind Clara's chair. The form matches the height and build of Dr. Hastings, but in the exposure his head is turned sharply away, as if unable to face what he had done. Time has a way of softening even the most unsettling histories. By the mid-20th century, the story of the Hastings photograph had faded into local folklore, a curiosity mentioned in footnotes and whispered about in old libraries. But in 1952, nearly half a century after Clara's supposed death, truth began to stir once more. That spring, a construction crew widening East Avenue unearthed a small, lead-lined coffin near the former Hastings property. The workers, thinking it a remnant of an old pet burial, pried it open. What they found stopped them cold. Inside lay the perfectly preserved body of a young girl, her white dress still intact, a dried rose clutched in her hands. Her features were unmarked by decay, her eyes slightly open beneath pale lashes. The city coroner, upon examination, confirmed the child was no more than 10 years old. But it was the chemical residue found inside the coffin that transformed a local discovery into a national sensation. Tests revealed traces of chloroform and a crystalline compound derived from early refrigeration agents, chemicals known to have been used experimentally in the first decade of the 20th century by physicians studying tissue preservation. The coffin itself was airtight, equipped with a primitive valve system designed to regulate internal pressure. It was not a burial casket, it was a preservation chamber. When the coroner's report was made public, surviving documents linked the site beyond any doubt to the Hastings family estate. The girl was almost certainly Clara Hastings. The coroner's conclusion was cautious, but damning. The subject appears to have expired during or shortly following exposure to preservation compounds consistent with early experiments in reversible death. In simple terms, she had been subjected to a failed scientific procedure. Whether the act was born of cruelty or of love was left for history to judge. The rediscovery of the body reignited public fascination. Old newspapers reprinted Samuel Kent's haunting recollection of the child's breathing. Medical historians revisited Dr. Hastings' papers, noting his references to temporary death as curable suspension. To some, he became a tragic visionary, a man ahead of his time whose science foreshadowed modern cryonics. To others, he was a cautionary figure, blinded by grief and ambition. In 1953, a new analysis was published in the Journal of Medical Ethics, authored by none other than Dr. Howard Leland, then in his 70s. Leland concluded that Clara's death likely resulted from prolonged exposure to anesthetic compounds combined with hypothermic stress. In his final paragraph, he wrote, "If Dr. Hastings erred, it was not in science, but in love. His experiment was never cruelty, it was refusal, a father refusing to believe in endings." That line would outlive the paper itself. It captured what so many felt upon seeing the photograph now displayed in the Monroe Historical Society. The small girl in the wicker chair, her eyes open to eternity, her parents standing behind her like figures carved from grief. The image, taken in desperation, had become something more than evidence. It had become a mirror of the human condition, the eternal struggle between intellect and emotion, between letting go and holding on. The photograph remains on quiet display today in a corner of the Society's permanent collection, labeled simply Hastings Family, circa 1909. Visitors often walk past without noticing, mistaking it for another relic of the Edwardian era. But those who stop to look, truly look, often remark on the same thing: the faint shimmer in the girl's eyes, the suggestion of breath beneath the stillness. It is as if the moment captured refuses to die, suspended forever in that fragile space between faith and science. In the end, no one knows precisely what Dr. Hastings hoped to achieve. Perhaps he truly believed he could bring her back. Perhaps he only wanted to preserve her long enough to say goodbye. Either way, his experiment failed, and with it, a piece of his sanity. Yet through the tragedy runs a thread of pity, even grace. He was not the first father to defy nature out of love, nor will he be the last. His failure reminds us of what binds every generation, the wish to rewrite the laws of loss, to delay the inevitable for just one more heartbeat. And so the photograph endures, a frozen moment, a scientific curiosity, and a quiet monument to human denial. The pale face, the empty glance, the perfect calm, all hiding the terrible truth that love, in its most desperate form, can become the thing that takes life away. The file closes with the coroner's final note, handwritten in the margin of his report. Subject interred respectfully, identity presumed, no further investigation required. But that statement, like the photograph itself, leaves one haunting question unanswered. When the shutter clicked, was Clara Hastings already gone? Or did the camera capture not her death, but her final, lingering breath. The truth may never be known, yet perhaps that uncertainty is what keeps her story alive. A reminder that every photograph is both memory and mystery, both proof and illusion. If you ever find yourself in Rochester, you can still see the portrait. It hangs under soft museum light, a century-old testament to grief, ambition, and the fragile line between life and death. Some visitors say they feel watched as they stand before it. Others claim they see the slightest shimmer in the girl's pupils, like the glint of a fading soul unwilling to let go. And perhaps that is the lesson the Hastings story leaves us with, that in our search to conquer death, we sometimes forget to understand life itself. If this story has sparked your interest in the hidden truths of history, consider subscribing to our channel to help keep hidden histories alive. We kindly invite you to share in the comments from which city you are watching from and your local time. We are interested to know how far these documented accounts travel.